Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. I'm Edward, and today we are going to talk about a subject that I think is a little misunderstood in the lifestyle, and it's something that people can be very passionate about on one side or the other. And the goal here today is not to try and convert anyone to thinking one way or believing another way, but just to simply talk about things and just try to bring a little bit of a general understanding of a subject that is often a little misunderstood. So that's the goal. The goal is to kind of take the passion out and just talk about just the facts and try and give just perhaps a very simplistic, brief introduction if this is something that is new to you, and hopefully dispel a few myths along the way of about what is poly. Poly is something that is seen fairly often in the lifestyle from people who have more than one partner, want more than one partner, um, all sorts of different ways to look at it. Poly is also something that is misused within the lifestyle. By misused, a common example, and I don't mean to pick on dominant. Sorry, Doms, but I'll pick on you a little bit here. But typically, the most common misuse of poly is the dominant who tells their submissive they are in a relationship, a poly relationship with their primary partner, and they're poly, and unfortunately, that other partner has no idea of a poly being a part of it and or the submissive. So it's kind of used as cover for cheating. So that's probably the most common misuse. So today I just want to try and talk about poly to bring kind of an understanding, and if it's something that's new to you, provide some terminology that is often used with people who are poly. Even if poly isn't for you, it'll help you to understand them and their relationships. So poly comes from Greek and Latin. It's a combination of two things. It's not all Greek and it's not all Latin. The poly part is Greek and simply means many. And the other part of polyamorous is Latin for amor, which is love. So basically, it's many lovers. And when you hear many lovers, people immediately go to and think of a sexual component, and that is not always the case. People who are poly and partnered, it doesn't mean that they have a sexual relationship or a sexual component to their relationship. They could just be emotionally connected as partners and not share a sexual component. Another thing that is fairly common um, with it is you'll see people refer to themselves as ethically non monogamous or consensually non monogamous. And once again, people tend to immediately think that means that this person or people are poly. And that may not be the case. It just means that they are not monogamous and they do it in an ethical manner. They could be in an open relationship or perhaps a part of what is called the swinging lifestyle, where they involve themselves sexually, sometimes even with deep friendships with people, but they don't love those people. It's a physical. It's non-monogamous in the fact that they are engaging in sexual relations with other people that are not their primary partner who they love and emotionally are monogamous with, but they are non-monogamous in the sexual sense with others, open and honest and consensual about it. So a very common way to see that in the lifestyle would be, once again, we're going to pick on the dominance, and it doesn't have to be, it could be a submissive as well. I've seen it both ways. But one partner enjoys being shared or sharing their partner, possibly for sexual play, or even possibly in the realm of sharing them for lifestyle play, which may not include sex, but can be for many people just as intimate or even more intimate than sex. So there is a difference between being ethically non-monogamous and poly. If you are poly, you are ethically non-monogamous, but poly takes it that additional step in that there's a relationship there's that goes beyond friendship or the possibility of that happening. So a poly person is loving more than one person, basically. It is not cheating. Sometimes that's a common misconception, especially online. You hear a lot of people when they hear somebody say they're poly, they immediately judge them as being somebody who is behaving unethically, and cheating, and that's definitely not the case. It shouldn't be looked at as a red flag that this person or people are cheating. Now, just like any monogamous relationship, poly people can cheat. Some do cheat, unfortunately, and it's just like a standard monogamous relationship where the other person is unaware of what is going on, and that is cheating, and it happens within monogamy and it happens within poly as well. And there are other people who look at poly and is typically people who are polyamorous. they excuse me, should have had a drink of water there, I guess. Um, but they look at polyamory as a sexual orientation, just as being straight or pansexual or bisexual. They feel that being poly is a sexual orientation. Once again, that's not to say whether they're right or wrong. It's just how they look at it. And so just be aware sometimes that people do feel that poly is a sexual orientation and it needs to be respected just like anybody else's who identifies however they do sexually. So, since this is kind of an orientation to poly, and we just finished talking about sexual orientation, let's take a minute and get a word from the podcast sponsor out of the way, and we'll come back and continue to chat about poly. All right, thank you for listening to that brief message, and welcome back. So, once again, we're chatting about poly, and kind of talked a little bit about ethically non-monogamous versus poly and how they kind of fit together. Another area where there is some ambiguities with people, or sometimes people get easily confused between being polyamorous and polygamy. Polygamy is being legally married to more than one spouse. It could be more than one husband, it could be more than one wife, it could be more than one husband and wife, or however it fits. Um, However you look at it, whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, or you're somewhere in the middle, it is something that is not legal in most places. The reason why it was outlawed primarily has to do with protecting women from those religious doctrines that are out there. Some religions have them where men are allowed to have multiple wives, and men being men abused women and their wives and to take advantage of this. So, of course, laws were passed to regulate this, and also, of course, it does go against conservative values, or a century ago, even values that were commonplace and commonly held. So don't expect this to change, even though being poly is something that is getting much more open, much more accepted. It's still not to a point where things are probably going to change with the legality of it. Um, the Solomon Islands does legalize it. So if you want to have two husbands, you may want to consider a move to the Solomon Islands, or become. Here's another option: everyone becomes a resident or citizen of Sweden, then goes to the Solomon Islands, gets married, and then when you go back home to Sweden, Sweden does recognize poly marriages that are performed elsewhere. So if you got married in the Solomon Islands, Sweden would recognize that and treat your marriage. just like a typical monogamous marriage. It is a felony in the United States. However, if you live in the great state of Utah, imagine that. But in Utah, it is a, it's illegal and you could, you know, get in trouble for it. But the trouble you would get in is the equivalent of getting a traffic ticket, like you were speeding or you ran a red light. Now, however, I would imagine that since Utah is typically a very conservative place, if it was, say, a husband, and a husband, they might be looking for ways to do more than just write you a traffic ticket. But that's my own personal belief. And I know we said we were going to not be trying to take some of the passion out of it. So I apologize for kind of letting my personal beliefs come out there. But I just sort of couldn't help it. And sometimes my filter does get a little clogged and things come out. And that's one of those times. But being poly and having multiple people in a loving relationship is not illegal anywhere. At least not anywhere like US, Canada, Europe. It's not illegal. And the drawback is laws around marriage provide certain protections, whether it be in the United States, for example, your spouse cannot incriminate you or doesn't have to share a conversation with a court that happens between husband and wife. Another area where you wouldn't have legal protection would be unfortunate times like making medical decisions for someone that you love if you're poly. If you're not legally their spouse, you would not necessarily be able to make those decisions, or at the unfortunate end of life, once again, there are certain provisions that people who are married are entitled to that those who are unmarried unfortunately are not entitled to. So it can present problems. And if you are going to, engage in a loving long-term poly relationship, it is best to find an attorney who specializes in it, and they are out there. And if you are looking for one, the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom has a handy tool that would be able to help point you in the direction of finding whether it be legal help to possibly even a therapist to help you improve your partnership. So that's just a resource that's out there. And just like many things, the poly itself is not it's not standard. It's not cut and dry. So when you hear somebody say that they're in a poly relationship, their relationship is probably different than the next person that you meet who is in a poly relationship. So while this isn't going to be a complete list of the kind, and not every poly partnership is going to fit within these categories or descriptions, it's a good starting point, especially if you are newer, to understanding the different styles or types of poly relationships that are out there. The first one is where there's a hierarchy, and typically, and once again, this is typically, there's always atypical. There's a primary couple involved who most likely live together. They could be married, have the combined finances. They may very well have children, and to the vanilla world, it would seem very much like a typical monogamous relationship, unless they're open about being poly. But most times, unfortunately, because of the way society is, it would be something that would be behind closed doors. So to the rest of the world, it's going to appear very normal, very husband wifey, or husband and husbandy, or wife and wifey. However, whatever relationship would typical appear. In the hierarchy, they typically have rules for their secondary relationships that they've agreed on before they enter into those other relationships. In some of those relationships, one partner has the ability to veto, and by veto, it's they're not president and disagreeing with some legislation that's come their way, but they feel that the other partner's budding or secondary relationship, even if it's established, is somehow negatively impacting their their relationship with their primary partner. And so they are vetoing that relationship, meaning that the other person has to end the relationship because they have decided that their their primary relationship is the most important. And when that happens, that other partner has the ability to put a veto out there and terminate that secondary relationship. Another area where you see hierarchy in poly is here in the DS lifestyle. It's a fairly common thing to see, where you may have, and we'll use the way most people in DS, when you hear poly, typically think of the dominant with, say, two submissives. And in that case, one submissive may be the alpha submissive, and that submissive would have the ability to delegate or to basically kind of be the dom to the other submissive in the absence of the dominant. So there would be a hierarchy. The dominant rules the roost, so to speak. The alpha submissive is the next one in charge, and then the submissive below that would have to follow the direction of both the dominant and the alpha submissive. So that's another area where you see poly with a definite hierarchy. Another type of poly, which is fairly common, is common. In fact, I want to say just the other day, but it was probably more like 3 to 6 months ago. I was having my commute home listening to NPR, and they actually had a story about new story about a poly triad, and they practice what was called kitchen table poly. And what that means is that everyone involved in the relationship can sit down at the dinner table and discuss their relationship, problems, positives, give advice to the other partner. And it's something where everyone can reach out to everyone. They can feel comfortable talking to other partners directly. They don't need to go through one partner to get to the permission to go to the other partner. It's very much I would liken it to a large family, or not necessarily large, but a family where you can reach out to whoever you need to talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. And that that is something that is gaining traction and probably is one of the most common types of poly that is out there. Another one that is sometimes confusing to people, especially who are new, and this is called a mono-poly relationship. And it's actually quite simple. What it means is that in a relationship, you have one person who is poly, one person who is monogamous. And the monogamous partner realizes that the partner they love is poly. And so they have agreed, and it's consented to, that the poly partner can have other partners while the other partner chooses to stay strictly committed and stay with their partner who just happens to be poly and has other partners. So it's mono, but it's poly. Sometimes in DS, you will see that where you have one partner who is, say, kinky, and the other partner is vanilla, and the vanilla partner doesn't want anything to do with the lifestyle, but understands that their partner that they love and cherish needs to have the DS lifestyle. So they allow their other partner to pursue a poly relationship to have that need met. So that's a way where you would see mono poly in DS. Another style of poly relationships is called a quad. Being a skier, the first thing I think of when I hear the word quad is a chairlift that holds four people. But in this case, we're not on a chairlift, but it does involve four people. Typically, a quad is poly, an existing couple that is poly, and they find another couple who is also poly, and the four people come together to form a relationship. Now, sometimes in those relationships, it's one where everyone is loving, intimate, and sexual with each other. And other times, it can be very different combinations. If we took an example of using a typical straight couple, male female couple, and the men loved the women loved the men, and while the women loved each other, they were straight, so there was no sexual part of the love between them. It's just the emotional bond. So that would be an example of a quad type relationship. Now, the next type of poly relationship styles is something that when I first saw this described, I thought that it was referring to somebody who was single, but knew that in relationships going forward that they would want to be poly. However, it's was a complete misunderstanding on my part, and it's called solo poly. And what that means is that the person or people involved in the relationship, they typically live alone, even though they may have multiple relationships. They most likely probably don't have the traditional relationship goals that most of us think of when we think of a relationship. You know, they don't typically have the, okay, we're going to move in together and then we'll get engaged and then we'll get married and we'll have kids. They're not looking for a typical relationship. They enjoy having their own space. They enjoy living life as a single but partnered person and partnered with more than one person. So that's what a solo poly relationship is. Now, another one that comes up next is going to be something that I'm sure everyone has heard of, and that is the triad or the throuple. And this is just like, in all the TV or movies that are out there, it's three people who are in a partnership. It's very common. It's something that if you are active on blogs or fetish or DS websites, you see probably people looking for this all the time, an existing couple looking to add a third to the relationship. And if you didn't know, um, if the couple that is looking for the third is looking for a woman, they're seeking a unicorn. That's because finding a woman who wants to join a relationship with an existing couple is quite a challenge. It's like finding a unicorn. And don't worry, guys. If you are a guy looking to join that kind of a relationship, there's a name for you. You're a dragon. So if you are a couple looking to have a unicorn join you or a dragon, then you are looking to form a triad or a throuple. And another common style of relationship in a poly setting is called the V. And what is a V? If you can imagine the letter V, you have one person who is at the bottom of the V, and they are in a relationship with two people who are kind of the tops of the V. And since the V goes apart from the bottom, that signifies that the common factor is the one person. The other partners don't touch, they don't interact. Everything goes through that one person at the bottom of the V. So typically in a V style relationship, the one person is kind of the glue holding it all together. The other two individuals that are involved in the relationship, they may be friends, or they may not even know each other at all, and they may not care to know each other at all. Everything goes through the V. If one partner has an issue with maybe the amount of time that they're having with their significant other, or feels somehow that there's an issue, it flows through the one person to the other person. There's no, in a V, there's no no real contact between the two partners. As partners, everything flows through that one person at the bottom of the V. Sometimes this is called a parallel poly, because the other two partners kind of run in parallel lines. They don't ever touch. They don't ever interact. So if you have a V style relationship, one partner is going to be the primary conduit of information between the partners. And once again, in the DS lifestyle, typically in a V style poly arrangement, the bottom of the V will be the dominant partner because they are going to want to have the control and lead the relationship. So in a DS relationship or in a DS poly relationship that is V-shaped or parallel, the dominant is going to be the one that is the conduit of information between the two partners, the other two partners, excuse me. Okay. So that's an overview of the different types of poly relationships. And remember, every relationship is unique. And that was not the end all and be all list of styles or types of poly partnerships, but it's a great starting point, and you will find that just like everyone in every relationship, they're unique. So what one partnership might call a V, another might seem more like a hierarchy to you, but everyone is unique, and don't expect every relationship to fit neatly into predefined boxes. But it's a good starting point to understand that there are different styles and different ways to have a poly relationship, and you can, just like DS, you can make it your own, which is an amazing thing. Now, there are a few more terms I'd like to talk about. There won't be a vocabulary test. There won't be you won't have to remember definitions. There'll be none of that at the end. But I think it's important to kind of cover some other terminology that people who are poly will often use, and it will help you to understand what they're talking about, and especially if it's something that might be of interest to you. So the first thing is what they call an anchor partner. Um, and in a lot of times this would be considered like a dominant partner or a dominant relationship, but it's not in a hierarchy. The anchor partner isn't above anyone in the relationship, but they are kind of the partner that is perhaps the glue that, if things get bumpy, they're the glue that holds it together. So kind of related to the anchor partner is also called a core partner. The difference between an anchor and a core partner typically, and once again, these are all typicals, and not everyone is going to fit this, even if they identify as an anchor or a core partner or anything else. These are all just generalizations. A core partner is very much like the anchor partner, but typically lives with, cohabitates with um, their partner in the poly relationship. And often that cohabitation and that partnership is a life partner. So the core partner is typically the person that's been there through thick and thin and will be there through thick and thin, and perhaps a secondary partner or secondary partners may come and go. Now, this next term is kind of one for the birds, and it kind of makes perfect sense. A nesting partner, I think, would be quick guess would be the partner that lives with the other partner. Oftentimes, a nesting partner is a primary partner, but not always. And since we just said primary partner, that what is a primary partner? Typically, a primary partner is something that you see or hear used in a poly relationship that does have a hierarchy. And just like it sounds, the primary would have either the highest priority in the hierarchy. They'd be the general on top, or possibly it means that they are the longest member, the longest partnered partner in the partnership. Well, that's a lot of partners in there, but they would either be the primary or they would have been involved the longest. So that would be how a primary partner is defined. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a mouthful, but a uh, monotypical, and that's a term that you will hear typically used by poly people to refer to what is a traditional monogamous relationship or the concept of that is out there, which is not so much a lifestyle concept, not so much because DS people typically are more open minded and don't necessarily hold this value, but in the vanilla world, in a monogamous way of thinking, there are many people who are vanilla who kind of have the I licked it, so it's mine mentality when it comes to relationship. Only, well, I mean, it can involve licking, I guess, but it's a kind of the concept of sexual ownership, the vanilla way of thinking of, okay, I am sleeping with, having sex with this person, therefore, we are in a relationship, and because we are having sex, I am a priority, and I can kind of lay claim over this person in not only their personal life, but in other areas of their life because we are together, because we are having sex. And while that's definitely not the case in a outmolded way to look at things, many people in the vanilla world do see the world that way. So when somebody says monotypical, that is what they're referring to, the old fashioned way of, I licked it, so they're mine. Another term that is out there is called relationship escalator. It's not going between floors at the airport, but it is the concept of building a relationship up towards certain goals. Oftentimes, poly people use this kind of tied to that monotypical narrative of I licked it, therefore it's mine, because it's very much a monogamous way of vanilla monogamous way of looking at the world. You start out dating, and then you move from dating to dating exclusively. And when that goes well, you move in together, and boy, that's going well. So you get engaged, then you get married, and then you have kids. Now, not that you have to do that in that order. I mean, Lord knows people do it in all sorts of different orders, but it's a way of that sometimes the monogamous people who are monogamous approach the world. It's a very step by step, and you want to build, and there are goals to build, and there are people who are poly follow a similar thing because they want to build towards certain goals and have certain goals in mind for a relationship. And it's not saying that that's good or bad. It's just it's what people want and how they go about doing it. Now, the opposite of the relationship escalator is what is called a relationship landscape. And it's rather than starting at point A with a goal of getting to point B, it's sort of looking at a person's relationship or relationships and seeing it as a landscape rather than how do I get from point A to point B. Um, there's no higher or lower points. There are no goals or there's steps. It's basically enjoying enjoying the view and taking in the view and allowing the resources that are there to grow into whatever they want to grow into. It's seen as a more flexible approach to building, exploring a relationship rather than having a series of defined steps to get from point A to point B. So it's just a different way of relationship building. Now, there's another term which is very helpful, whether you're monogamous or poly, but it's very important if you are poly, and it's called new relationship energy. And it's something that we've all experienced. It's that time when you just start dating a person and oh man, they are some kind of wonderful. You can't get enough of them. You want to talk to them day and night. You, every spare second you glance at your phone, you hear it vibrate or feel it vibrate, and boy, you hope it's a text from that amazing person, and you're just all wrapped up and excited about all the possibilities. That's new relationship energy, and it's great, and it's something we've all experienced. Where it becomes a potential problem or an issue is if you're poly, you have other partners. And so this new relationship energy can cause your existing partners to feel possibly left out, perhaps maybe even a little bit jealous. So it's something that if you are poly, you need to be aware of that you're experiencing this. Your partners need to be aware that you're experiencing this. And oftentimes people who are poly, knowing new relationship energy and knowing that it happens, they go out of their way during this time to dedicate extra time and attention to their existing partner or partners so that they don't lose that connection to their existing relationships while they're building a new one. So that's new relationship energy. Another term that you'll hear a lot in around people who are poly is called a polycule. And that's just the simple term for the people that are involved in a poly relationship. Three or more people, that are all in a relationship, whether it's a V or hierarchy, there's a hierarchy or they're parallel, whatever. It's just the people involved in the relationship. All right, another term is called polyfidelity, and what that um, is just when people involved in a poly relationship decide that they are very content with the people that are in the relationship and nobody in that relationship wants to pursue or bring in new partners. Oftentimes, you will hear that called a closed poly relationship, meaning that just like it says, it's closed. They do not want, nor is anybody seeking new partners. They are going to just continue their relationship with the people that are involved. Very, very simple thing, but it's important to understand when somebody says that they, especially if they're in a closed poly relationship, it means that they are not looking. And even if you are interested in them, the relationship is closed. You're not going to gain entry. So that's important to know. And there's another term here which I think is important that whether you're poly or not, that you consider, especially if you're involved in the lifestyle, and that's unlearning. Unlearning is just exactly what it sounds. But since most of us come from a background where we were, raised monogamous, raised to think about relationships with just one person, finding that one person and having happily ever after happen, and all those thoughts and dreams the vanilla world puts out there for us, what unlearning is just being able to have an open mind and realizing that there are non-monogamous ways to have a relationship, and also to understand that if you are wanting to pursue a poly relationship, that those non-monogamous lifestyle habits um, will have to be adjusted as you go forward and learn to deal with things that are different in poly. So whether you're poly or not, I think it's good to look at what we have learned and what we've been conditioned to think of as traditional relationships and do our best to open our mind and to unlearn and to accept that people do it differently and they do it amazingly well differently because it works for them, even if it's not for you. So I think it's very important that we keep in mind that having an open mind means that we have to at times unlearn things that we have already learned. Now, within the DS lifestyle and people who may be just exploring DS or just kind of exploring some of their kinks, not really looking for a DS relationship, but are involved in DS. As you come into contact with more and more people involved, you will run into more and more poly people. I think it's important that we not assume that when you hear poly, that you also assume that they are involved in DS or they're kinky. A lot of people who are poly associate with people involved in the lifestyle because it's a very open-minded place. It's a safe place for them to be them, even if perhaps they don't share the same kinky pursuits that other people here do. It's a safe place that they can be open about how they love and who they love, which is fantastic. Also, another assumption that when people hear poly and then DS, I think all of us at one point when we heard those words assumed we were talking about a dominant who wanted more than one submissive. It's a fairly common thing to kind of immediately picture in one's mind. However, that's definitely not the case. There are many people who are poly and involved in DS who are not dominant, um, or I mean, monopoly is a perfect example. The poly person is exploring DS because it's a need. Their other partner isn't interested in DS or interested in having another partner, but they love their partner enough to allow them to explore and to have that DS partner. So it's not about a dominant having multiple submissives. And I think that's a very common misconception that we need to throw out the window. Not only not only do you have that thrown out the window, but I have to say that I believe that all of us in the lifestyle do need to look at people who are in successful poly relationships, and whether we're poly or not, they have lessons we can learn from because being involved in a poly relationship takes the ability to clearly communicate on so many things and to communicate effectively with your partners. Their communication skills have to be fantastic. I mean, they have to communicate on boundaries, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Can you do this with a person? Can you do that with a person? They have to be able to clearly communicate on boundaries. They have to agree on so many things to make it functional and to work and talk through many hard adult conversations have to happen. And then on top of that, there's scheduling. I mean, we all know how busy our lives are. Now imagine that same level of busyness in having two partners, or three partners. There's going to be scheduling, there's going to be scheduling conflicts. How do you handle it if one partner feels they are not getting the time that they need? And how do you talk to your other partners about the one partner that has the scheduling issue? And it's a complex thing to solve. And another area that life is people have kids. So how do you handle kids and poly? Are you going to live under the same roof? Are you going to have separate households? How do you handle that and do it effectively and still be a great parent? It's definitely not something that is easy. So I think there are so many skills, especially on the communication side, and being able to handle and work through disagreements that people who are poly have amazing skills and skill sets that they have developed to handle all of those things. Um, a bit of a word of warning with poly, especially online and dominance. It's something that you see a lot of newer dominants that, well, not only have they discovered DS because, they cruised Reddit for 20 minutes yesterday and thought, wow, this is really cool. They also discovered poly 30 minutes later. So they want to be dominant and they want to have multiple submissives and they're new. That needs to be a red flag for submissives because, boy, it takes a lot of learning to become a dominant and to become a dominant who can effectively lead their partner. And then when you throw in all the complexities of poly, it's something that is not an easy learn. And of course, with something like that, there is an exception to the rule. If you have a dominant who is newer, but perhaps they have had existing poly relationships or are in existing poly relationships, so they've got the poly side down, they're just new and being honest and upfront that they know they're poly because they are poly and have been practicing poly, then that's a different story. But sometimes you see the I don't know whether you'd call it new domitis or rookie domitis, where it's just a new dominant who is like a kid at a buffet of their favorite candy. They're just going to town and can't get enough of it, and think that they need more than one submissive. So that can be something kind of as a red flag to watch out for. Um, and once again, if you're around the lifestyle, you're going to interact with, you're going to meet people who are a poly. And this podcast wasn't designed to try and convince you to try to be poly or convince you that poly is bad and not for you. What I wanted to do was just talk about some of the generalities of poly, what some of the terms mean, so that when you encounter somebody who's poly and they state that they are in a V relationship with their partners, you understand what V means. Or they say that they're in a poly relationship and they have a nesting partner. I mean that you understand what that means. Or if they say that they don't have a hierarchy in their poly relationships, you can understand what that means. It was just to give a general, kind of a very high introduction, high profile or high altitude introduction to poly, because there's so much to it and so many misconceptions that I just wanted to talk about it a little bit, chat about it, and hopefully encourage people to not be afraid of it. Even if you don't feel poly is for you, there's a lot we can unlearn from our monogamous typical upbringings, um, that poly can help us become better partners, going forward, whether we choose to have one partner or multiple partners. So there's a lot to learn from poly, whether you are poly or not. So if you happen to be listening to this on Spotify mobile, I'd love to hear your feedback, especially if you're poly or if you're not, why you feel that that is a great fit for you. And if you aren't perhaps up for leaving some feedback, at least go ahead and answer the quick survey there at the bottom of the episode. And for everyone else, I want to thank you for listening. Please don't forget to hit the follow button so you will automatically be updated whenever a new episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper comes out. I look forward to chatting with you soon and have a great day.